Have you ever caught yourself wondering how God really feels about atheists? I mean, it's kind of an awkward thing, isn't it? How God feels about those people that God made that don't believe in God. It's an interesting thing to think about. What do you suspect is most likely? Would you suspect that what is most likely is that God is hurt by that? Is there a chance that maybe God is hurt? Like, wait, you don't believe in me? Do you suppose it's more likely that God is angry? Oh, you're not going to believe in me? Oh, okay then. We can play that way. Do you suppose God is worried? Like, wait a minute. If that person doesn't believe in me and they start talking to other people and get a bunch of other people to get on the bandwagon, what's going to happen? I find myself, in my imagination, finding it most likely that God finds that whole idea of atheism as kind of funny. Wouldn't you suspect it's likely that God thinks it's kind of funny? Like when someone says, I'm way too smart and logical to believe in God. Don't you think that's amusing? Like God is in heaven saying, have fun not believing in me with that brain that I gave you. Jesus says in the gospel that God takes pleasure in being good to atheists. It says God likes blessing atheists just as much as believers. God, in the words of Jesus, waters the gardens of bullies with just as much rain as the gardens of hospice nurses. God enjoys atheists going to the beach and playing frisbee in the surf just as much as a youth group. It's interesting for us to consider what implications God doing that has for us. Recently, I watched a clerk at the post office do this brilliantly. And if you go to our post office, you may know who was behind the desk when I was there. I was the third in line. The first person in line was upset with her letter carrier. She said, I'm very upset. My letter carrier will not deliver packages to my house. I get all the mail, but whenever I get a package, I get a note that says I've got to come pick it up. So the clerk said in a very cheerful voice, let me get to the bottom of that for you. That sounds difficult. I'll go to the back. And when she went to the back and looked in the paperwork, she found that that house is home to a large dog that barks and growls fiercely whenever the letter carrier goes on the porch, which is where the mailbox is. And so she came back and reported that to the woman. And the woman said, well, I don't let the dog out. And the clerk said, the problem is there's no way for you to guarantee that if you came to the door to talk to the letter carrier, the dog wouldn't get out. And this particular letter carrier has been bitten badly and has been out of work in the past for terrible dog bites. And so this is a complicated issue. And the woman said, well, then I want to file an official complaint. And the clerk said, I can help you with that. Nothing got her off her game. The next person in line was very different, but she just had no emotion at all. She said, I'd like to send this certified mail. And the clerk said, I'd be happy to take care of that for you. And then she said, but I don't want to do it if it's going to cost more than $50. That would be outrageous. And the clerk said, well, let me see the best price I can get you. And the clerk said, I've got wonderful news. I can send this for $28 and it's guaranteed to get there tomorrow or your money back. And the woman said, okay. I noticed this, no matter who came up to her, whether they met her with kindness or with anger or apathy, nothing was going to get her off balance. she was going to be just as pleasant to the happy person as to the grouchy person. Martin Luther King said something really beautiful about this attitude. He said, "Don't ever put your thermostat in someone else's room. Don't let anyone have control of your thermostat dial. You set the temperature, no one else. If other people want to turn up the heat, don't let that cook your goose. Keep your thermostat under your control." Warm weather fronts can come in, and cold weather fronts can come in too. We have no control over that, but we're in control of our thermostat. We don't have to let anyone else adjust our temperature. When I talk with people who are very good at this, one of the things I've heard that has surprised me, but I recognize as being true when I hear them say it, is that nothing that anyone ever does to you is ever personal. Even if they mean it to be. Even if someone says something to be personally offensive, they're actually incapable of doing it. Because no one is ever so focused on us that it's about us. It's always about them, whether they know it or intend it or not. So that postal clerk doesn't know anything about the woman with the barking dog, but she can use her imagination to wonder, maybe that dog is the only thing that helped that lady get through her divorce. And being told that her dog is a problem personally offends her. It has nothing to do with the post office, because it's nothing personal. It's always about the other person, not about us. And if we can know that, we know that God knows that. If God's looking at an atheist that God created, God also knows that that person had a childhood that was completely hostile to faith, or experiences in their young life that were completely antithetical to having faith. And so God knows. God knows it's not personal. Whenever we're encountering someone else and their behavior, we can know, even if it doesn't feel like it, that it's not about me. It's about them. It's always about them, whether they intend it to be or not. No one can get out of their own way. No one can divorce themselves from their own childhood or their own background or their own way of looking at the world. So this week, we're being given an opportunity to put our life against the description that Jesus has of how God acts. And one of the big questions we can ask ourselves, maybe one of the focusing, pinpointing kind of questions would be, how has the pandemic affected me? Do I have a shorter fuse than I used to? Am I any different than I was before we went through what we've been through these past 3 years? Am I much more likely now to take the bait than I used to be? Am I much more likely now to bite the hook when it's dangling in front of me with bait? Do I let other people fiddle with my thermostat? Jesus says, if you can only be nice to the people who are nice to you first, you're going to have a rough time, because you have no control over how other people are going to act. And it's not about you anyway. He says God is nice to the people who are wonderful and to the people who are not so great. God is as good to atheists as God is to hospice nurses. Maybe this is a time for us to take a page out of God's book.